Welcome to Paradigm Shift Parenting, a podcast for women who make their lives better by first making themselves better. At Paradigm Shift Parenting, we believe that self-improvement is the highest form of self-care. Each episode, we're going to either shift our mindset about something, explore the myth that motherhood and martyrdom are synonymous, replace the oh-so-trendy victimhood mentality with a healthy dose of accountability and responsibility, or simply explore the shared experiences of modern motherhood. I'm your imperfect host, Binky Bell, and I'm glad you're here. All right. Hi, guys. Welcome back to another episode of the Paradigm Shift Parenting Podcast. As always, I'm Binky Bell, and I am here today with Beth Berry. Beth Berry is on a mission to liberate modern-day mothers. As a writer, activist, life coach, teacher, and mother of 4 daughters, she deconstructs disempowering social norms and narratives while supporting and connecting mothers who are fed up with the status quo and ready to live more empowered and joy-filled lives. I have Beth Berry here with me today because she is publishing her first book. It's your first book, right?
Correct. That's right.
Yes, and it is out today, the day that this is airing on May 1st. Beth, how was this process? Does it feel like you gave birth to another child? Because it feels so big and so important.
It has been a huge, I'm feeling a huge sense of accomplishment, in large part because it's been like a 7-year process. Largely because my kids I have 4 of them, because I have 4 kids and have had limited time within which to write the book. So much has happened in that amount of time. So yeah, it feels like a pretty big deal for me in my own journey.
Yes. So I actually was fortunate enough to get a copy of the book, and I'm so grateful for that. I was able to read it, and I have to say that whenever I was reading it, when I started, I would jot down quotes of things that I really liked in the book, and I had to stop because, every paragraph had something that I was like, oh, that's so good, or oh, that's so true. This is a first for me because I've never read anything that was so inspiring that I was then able to talk directly to the author. So this is a huge privilege for me, and I'm just so excited that you're here. I know that you gave a couple people some early access to the book. What's the response been? Is it what you've expected?
It's been pretty awesome, pretty positive. I've got a small launch team that is reading it early and giving me feedback, and it's been really heartwarming and especially interesting to hear what resonates for different people. Some of those people I know their story and know their struggles, and others not so much. But yeah, really, really cool to put a body of work out in the world and see how it lands and how people pick it up and what really speaks to them directly. It's been fascinating, actually.
Yeah. During the course of reading your book, personally, I don't know how much you've seen on my own Instagram. I know that you're really, really busy. I share a lot of my own, my struggle and my journey so far in parenting. I'm very early in it. My boys are they're turning 9 this summer. But I started out very rocky. I had a very hard time with it. And I've kind of been publicly documenting my evolution from being somebody who spanked their children, was yelling a lot, to adopting. I went through a phase of, we were very into whole life unschooling, and I followed very closely almost these dogmas. And I noticed that in your book, one of the things that you talked about was stories. And my own Instagram, the name Paradigm Shift Parenting is, you call them stories, I call them paradigms, but I related so much to that because it's just becoming more and more apparent to me that we adopt these stories of who we are or who we even think we could be that are so limiting. Can you talk a little bit about your own stories that you've adopted and shed throughout the years?
I started off at 17. I was a really young mother to begin with. And so my source of primary source of identity was motherhood. I came into my adulthood and grew and matured as a mother. And so I think that really shaped so many things. In large part, one of the things that I see that was really shaped early on for me was the sense that I needed to sort of prove myself as a good mother because I started so young, and the assumptions by people within the culture are that young mothers aren't going to be good mothers. So I think that set me on a path early of feeling like I'm going to prove the world wrong. You know, I loved my baby so much, and I would do anything for her. And I sort of set myself up with really high standards right from the start. And then I had real natural minded approach to motherhood. And right from the beginning, I saw how hard I was going to have to work in order to uphold those values. You know, like I was always the one, even at, age 20, bringing the more whole foods snacks to the preschool and being like, I don't want her eating this, and I don't want her eating this. And I had certain ways that I wanted things to be for her. I had a lot of idealism.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of idealism early on in my mothering, that it just felt like everywhere I turned, there was another social norm that I was pushing against everywhere, that I couldn't go anywhere without being in conflict of some kind around what I was wanting to provide my daughter and what the culture around me was offering. So that's one thing that really stands out to me. And in terms of stories and narratives that I've really been driven by, a big one is this simple notion that it's my job to give them the very best, no matter what. And just that at the core, and that one, and also that it's, if they're not happy, it's a reflection of what I am or am not giving them, able to offer. And so those are kind of impossible setups because there's only so much we can be, that, there's a huge gap between what we feel responsible for and what we're actually able to provide our kids. And so I was sort of setting myself up with like, oh, well, if that means if they're not happy or they're not thriving around whatever, then I've done something wrong. So that was a big part of it. And even the giving my kids the very best, that's a hard thing to do when you're broke and you're postpartum and you're, trying to figure out so many other things going on in life. And it means so many different things to so many different people. Giving them the very best education-wise, food-wise, strong attachments. What ended up happening for me is that my sense of self just lessened and lessened. It became all about the identity as mother and so little about who I was as a woman. It was probably one of the most damaging things that I could see that came out of my early parenting, is that I completely lost myself to it. And until I kind of hit a low point and decided to change things.
Now, whenever you were early in your parenting, and you were saying that you always had something you were pushing against, with the snacks and the schools, you were doing this, like 20 years ago, right? So it was even less normal than it is now, right? Did you get a lot of pushback from your family? How was your family reactive to you being such a young mother?
Yeah, I had a really supportive family, actually, and lived with my folks and my sisters for the first 2 years of her life. And it was actually a very supportive feeling, and felt like the most natural thing in the world to have so many hands on deck. If I needed to take a shower, people were fighting over who was going to hold the baby. It was so good. Really just a very gentle entry into motherhood in that regard. So I feel really fortunate about that. I actually also had a mother myself who was, pretty health minded and alternative in terms of, she grew a lot of our food and we ate really whole foods. So I had that strong support coming from my family. thankfully. So I wasn't having to fight against that too much from the inside. It was mostly when I got out into the world and was looking at schools and that kind of thing. I couldn't afford the alternative schools that were consistent with my values. But I sure fought for it. And, I ended up, it was another way that I kind of worked myself into the ground, because I volunteered so much in order to try to get them in the alternative schools. I was taking on the burden of whatever it was so that my kids could have the very best. And I did that to the extreme for a long time.
Yeah. In my own circles, that's something that I see quite a bit. And I mean, we see it online all the time, the trope of the mother who is just running herself ragged in the name of doing what's best by some standard for her children. I think it's interesting to me because whenever I look back on my own short experience of doing similar things, I think, and you can tell me if maybe this was true to some extent for you, I feel like for me, whenever I was in that mode, it almost feels a little bit like I was running from myself. And I feel like whenever sometimes we get so busy and we fill our schedules and we just keep moving. For me, at least, it's because there's a discomfort in being alone with yourself, alone with your thoughts. And then you kind of have to face yourself, your choices, your feelings. Do you feel like that was a little bit a factor for you?
Definitely. Yeah. I think that when I sat still too long, I started being able to feel the parts of myself that I had been leaving out, the parts of myself that I wasn't engaging or feeding. And there were so many of those because I started so young that it just felt like daunting to even go there. So motherhood actually became somewhat of a hiding place for me. It was like a permissible place to put my energy so that I didn't have to look at the ways that I had been self-abandoning and not caring for my whole self.
Right. So how your girls are, some of them are older now. You have a daughter in her 20s, right?
Yes. So they are 12. Nope. How old are they? 13, 15, 19, and 25.
Right. Have you had conversations with them about their childhood? Have you had any difficult conversations where you felt like maybe you had to apologize or explain yourself? Has that been, have you had to have like individual healing kind of sessions with each of your children?
Yeah, that's been slowly happening as things have come up, particularly with my two eldest daughters, who, have started going to therapy and doing things to take care of themselves, which I feel really happy about, that they're getting the supports that they need. I'm in full support. Like I used to have this feeling like, if I'm going to do everything I can so my kids won't have to go to therapy. And now I'm like, oh geez, like I sure hope my kids are in therapy. I hope they feel full permission to get all the support in the world.
Yes.
We all need it. So, so yes, I have. There have been plenty of organic moments that have come up where I have owned some things and let them know about some decisions that I made that when I look back don't feel like the healthiest choices, or looking at the ways that I, for example, one of the things that I was able to really see as my eldest daughter got older is that part of what I was doing was trying to spare her discomfort, trying to keep her, so she had some, social anxiety that she struggled with as a kid. And I was so uncomfortable when she was uncomfortable that when I look back, I think I enabled some of that behavior just in trying to avoid the discomfort within myself. And so as I've gained in my own self-awareness and grown in self-awareness, I now understand that there are certain moments of discomfort that are really important in the growth process.
Mm-hmm.
That there's a difference between sort of the pain of self-abandonment and the pain of growth, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one thing that I've really looked at with her. Another thing that I've really owned a lot with my kids is that I modeled codependent behaviors for quite a while, where I put the needs of other people and the well-being of others ahead of my own, to the point where it really to the point where I got resentful that I was giving so much away, and
Yes.
from that place for a while. And that's definitely something that I've owned and really worked hard to model something different in the past, dozen years, since I really had hit a low point.
Right. I think that's such an important conversation to have, that like to be able to, acknowledge the mistakes that we've made as parents. Not because it's anything really truly profound to admit that you've made a mistake, but because it's so normal to mess up. We're all going to mess up in some way. And I think that what I tend to think of is that to give yourself permission to mess up and to show your children that you can make mistakes is to also show them that they have permission to make mistakes. And it doesn't have to be anything hugely detrimental to your life unless you continue to make those mistakes, but the acknowledgement and the healing provides so much growth. And I think that's so important for children and especially young adults to learn.
Right. Because we're all human, we're all wired. None of us is going to do it perfectly. And so if we're modeling for them how to mess up, own it, and then what do you do after that? What do you do when you make mistakes? Those are really valuable tools. We're equipping them we're modeling for them a healthy progression through our choices. And I think that's invaluable for them. If you've got a parent who isn't owning their mistakes and going through that process, then you're either, it happens so often that either perfectionism is modeled, where then the child grows up feeling like they're not allowed to make any mistakes, which means they often don't take risks and get themselves stuck in situations that are really stifling to them, or not, in line with the life that they want to be living. Or you have people who beat themselves up because they're making mistakes. So I just think it's really important to model for our kids, what happens when you make choices that aren't in your best interest or in the best interest of others, then what? It's really about how do we respond to life, just as much as what's happening in our lives, just as important as what's happening is how we respond.
So in this current culture of motherhood, I think you and I have talked very briefly in the past just about the content that we see online, the way that it's being portrayed. It's interesting because what I see is this kind of weird dichotomy where women culturally are having a moment right now, right? Like with the Me Too movement, we feel like we're making all of these advances, and that like we're really big in the public eye right now, and it's very we have this air of empowerment. But then I look at the cultural narrative of motherhood, and it feels disempowering. It feels like we have to wait for society to catch up to care about motherhood. We feel like we have to wait for other people to give motherhood its worth. And that to me feels so disempowering. And your book really highlights the fact that you can give meaning to your experience of motherhood. You can make it something that's really empowering for you, and to where it's not your identity, right? Like you can have an identity outside of it. And I think, you should have an identity outside of motherhood, right? We can't be losing ourselves scrubbing floors and changing diapers.
Because if you really break it down, kids need to see us being invested as mothers, and they also need for us to model what it is to be a whole woman. Because if they only see how invested we are as a mother, then who's modeling for them what what it looks like to be a whole woman in the world, then they have to look outside of their homes for those examples. And there's not a lot of examples of what a whole healthy woman looks like out there. It's hard. It's, that's completely out of our control if we're not modeling that for them.
Okay. So do you have, what do you say? Because you do coaching as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you say to women who you can tell are just in the thick of it? They've lost their body, they've lost their identity, they've given up their hobbies, they're full-blown mama bear 24/7. What do you say to women to encourage them to unsurface themselves again?
Mm-hmm. Well, the place that I start is by meeting them where they're at, asking a lot of questions to figure out where are they, what parts of themselves are engaged and being expressed and what parts aren't. Really doing some exploring around the parts that are feeling atrophied within their sense of self, and what of those parts are, because often what happens is that when people hire me, part of what's happening within them and part of what feels so bad is that they've abandoned parts of who they are, and they're also not necessarily enjoying motherhood very much. This is pretty common, that they're just completely overwhelmed by it. And I actually have a theory that those parts we've abandoned are often the parts we need to bring back in order to enjoy motherhood more. Because if we're only operating from a partial sense of self, it's easy to see how we would feel resentful. If we have a strong creative side, for example, and it's not being engaged, we're not exercising that part, then we're essentially telling a part of ourselves. And if you can think of it like your inner child, like if you have an inner creative child and you're saying, nope, you don't get to have a place in the world, you can see how there's part of us that's always in protest. So when your kids are interrupting your project again, or there's yet another reason you can't create, the sense of frustration just mounts. So one of the things I like to do is help women to explore, mothers to explore which parts are being overworked within motherhood and which parts have gotten left out. And then also figuring out, where is your energy being drained and what are the things that fill you up, and trying to help them to reorient their prioritization around around things so that they're not draining so much energy in the day-to-day. Sometimes we don't stop to think about what exactly about the way my life is organized is not working for me. Because when we're really in the thick of it, it's hard to see this stuff. It's hard to sort it. And often mothers are so exhausted that it's, you kind of need someone with an outside perspective and maybe a little more, who's gotten a little more sleep to help you just figure out, point you in the direction of what's true for you again.
Something else that I see that you hit on in your book, of course, as well, is the consumerism, right? Like, and I feel like it's so easy because we have so many voices in our ears all the time telling us, you can feel like yourself again if you have the right cleaning schedule, if you get the right product, if you follow this detox plan or buy my meal plan or workout routine, then that's what's going to put you back on track. And I love with this book, again, that everything it just comes back to the self. Where are you? What parts have you lost of yourself? What are we building from? Where are we going? And that to me is just empowerment, and something that I'm talking about often on my platform here is the fact that everything starts with you and radiates out. So if you're healing yourself, if you're investing in yourself, the benefits of that are going to ripple out to your children. And then I think you're going to be giving your children what you're running yourself into the ground trying to give them. You're going to give them a better mom, a happier mom, somebody who's more willing to engage in the way that you want to engage with your children, instead of engaging in activities and narratives with your children that create a space for resentment. And I feel like resentment is one of those emotions that's, for me at least, really hard to come back from.
Yeah, I agree. I think it takes a lot of work to come back from. So when we can feel ourselves slipping into it, I think that's actually a great measure of when we're overgiving, is when we start to feel resentment. That can be a good meter when we're trying to feel our way through what to prioritize. If we start to feel the resentment coming on, that's an indication that we've gone a little bit too far.
Yeah. It's a great emotional navigation system, because it really lets you know where you are, what needs to be pulled back. I love the mentality of thinking of what examples we're giving to our children. Something that I try to do all the time is think of that as I'm going through my day. As much as I want to spare my children discomfort or pain, like you had hit on earlier, it's good to just kind of voluntarily expose them to discomfort, right? I have a child myself who has pretty severe anxiety, and my initial inclination was to just shield him from things that make him uncomfortable. And I just couldn't get past feeling like I was going to be running around constantly, overworking for him to protect him, and then ultimately hurting him in the end, because he's going to be out eventually. He's going to be exposed to things that I can't protect him from. We have to give them things bigger than us to hold on to a little bit.
Yeah, right. And also trust them with their own process. Trust them,
yes.
Equip them with ways to self-reflect and to self-regulate. And, I think we've done a real disservice by, so many of us grew up with narratives that focusing on ourselves was selfish.
Yes.
And I think it's really, really damaging, a pretty toxic narrative, because everything has to come. If we break that apart and look at why that doesn't work, when you're operating from a lack of self-awareness, then you're not actually understanding the effect that your actions have on other people. You're not understanding the power that you hold. And we end up doing a lot more damage when we don't have awareness of the way we're wired, what our needs are, what needs are being unmet within us. And also the way we feel in any given situation. We need to be able to understand that. Why am I feeling this way right now? What am I needing? What are these feelings telling me that I need? That self-awareness is so important. And alongside the self-awareness, I think that it has to come with self-compassion. Because if we just increase our self-awareness without self-compassion, it's just more reasons to beat ourselves up for not doing enough.
That's a wonderful point.
So those have to be coupled in my mind in order for us to be effective. And then from that place of increased self-awareness and self-compassion, we can then, those are like such key ingredients to being good at relationships. Mm-hmm. Because if I know myself well and I've built self-compassion, then I can own my shit,
right.
Do something that hurts someone else, and I've developed those two things within myself, then I can say, yeah, you know what, I did that based on these things that, and own it without being defensive, for example.
Yes. Mistakes become so much less scary whenever you're able to admit them and learn from them.
Right. And hold yourself with compassion as you go through the experience of being an imperfect human,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I feel like motherhood is so, it's often portrayed as something that happens to us. Like we're almost victims of it. But I feel like it is such a beautiful opportunity it just ushers in so much change if you allow it. And I feel like as women, that's something that's so profound and powerful, that the darkness that motherhood brings is such a ripe environment to grow from if you have support systems, right? If you have somebody who's willing to help you and guide you. In your book, you hit on the need for mentors. Have you read Russell Brand's book, Mentors?
I haven't.
It's really good. It's a short read, but he talks about that too. He's trying to call for the mentor relationship to come back and be a normal part of society. And your book, it feels, as I was reading it, it feels maternal. Like it feels like somebody's holding your hand and really kind of guiding you through certain stages of motherhood. And I feel like it anybody at any stage of motherhood is going to relate so well to the contents of it. And it just, the feeling that you get whenever you're reading it is so comforting. And I mean, you said things in the book that I have written in my own diary that I've talked about personally. And I love it so much because I really feel like this book is a turning point in the narrative of motherhood. I feel like it can usher in profound amounts of change. I'm so happy that you wrote it because it needs to be said. So much of what you talk about needs to be talked about, and you do it so well from such a place of warm understanding. I can't wait to read it again. I had to read it quickly, and I can't wait to just sit down and really dive into it again. Do you have plans to write another book?
Yes, absolutely. I got to get through this one and take a breather. But I absolutely do have plans to write another book, and I'm excited about it in large part because I'm in such a better place to write a book a little more efficiently than I was before. I have the space for it now that my kids are a little older, and I'm divorced now, and so I have them half the time. So I actually have a lot of space that's opened up in my life for my creative endeavors, for my professional life. And when I started writing that book, I was just so in the thick of it with little kids. And it's really, really hard to carve out time for those kinds of long-term projects when you're in the middle of, just so much chaos and so many interruptions. And so, yeah, and I appreciate your words. I'm glad that you feel like the book was both supportive and affirming of how you feel, and also that there's a maternal vibe.
There really was. I caught on to it. You know what's so funny? I don't know if you've noticed this, but I have read like Stephen King's book on writing. Dr. Jordan Peterson has mentioned things like this before, but there's this thing that I've noticed with male writers or men who've done accomplish great things. Whenever they talk about their process of how they released this great book or finished this great project, they always give advice on how you could do the same. And something that they say, I went and I wrote for 3 hours a day, uninterrupted, every day to get it done. And it drives me crazy because I'm like, who's holding the house down while you're doing that? And it's always been because I would like to eventually write a book one day, and I read stuff like that and I'm just like, that it's not going to work for everybody. Like, it's so funny.
And it really, and I talk about this a little bit in the book, how that this is one of the major disadvantages that mothers have, because there's this there are the constant interruptions, and there's all of this labor, emotional labor, and unpaid work that we're constantly engaged in that's not even recognized by society as valuable, but it's actually like what's keeping the whole society together.
Yeah.
But yet the same expectations are there of productivity, even though we're doing all of these other things that aren't even named by most people. Then you're also supposed to have a career and have these creative endeavors and be able to get your work done and stay fit and keep your house tidy and your kids ought to behave and also be in whatever. It's endless. The expectations of mothers are endless. And this idea that, I remember so vividly the years and years and years of trying with such desperation to carve out space for my creative endeavors, just to sit down and write uninterrupted. And even when I would get an hour or two here and there, it would take nearly that long for my nervous system to settle from whatever chaos I had just been living and to get into the creative flow. And then I would just, half the time I would just end up crying my way through a paragraph because I was so overwhelmed that there was no, it's like even what we do get in terms of carving out time for our projects or our passions is so precious and so little that it's often inadequate to even get to the creative thing because we've got all this emotional load to set down first. And it actually takes time to set that down and change gears in our brain, get back into the creative flow. And then when are we going to get the time again? You know, there were so many times that I would get like a few hours and I didn't know when I would get a few hours again. It's not like I had that predictably, you know,
Yes.
so it just end up feeling so discouraging so much of the time.
Yeah. And then, I mean, I've noticed with myself, you get into a creative flow, you start really writing or making progress on your project. And then one little interruption, it just pulls you out of that headspace. So even if the interruption is a quick, hey, Mom, I need a snack, it takes you another 30 minutes to get the juices flowing again.
Right, exactly.
So, and for me, that's one spot that I have to guard really closely because I can feel in my chest and my stomach, I get very frustrated and I can feel that resentment start to turn on. And then you kind of start going down that mental path of why can't I do that? Why won't they leave me alone? Don't they understand? And it's such a horrible place to serve your family from and to serve yourself from. I think I understand just so deeply the women that I talk to and the stories that I've heard myself of women who are just so frustrated and they feel so drained. And then add on to that the lack of community, something that you mentioned in your book. You'll probably be able to retell it a little bit better than me. But the fact that we're coming into motherhood mostly alone, and then we're supposed to build our own community from nothing whenever we are in need of a community.
Right. So we take women at their most disadvantaged, their most exhausted, their most overwhelmed state postpartum, when they need a community the most desperately. And then these women have to build it themselves if they want it. And building a community for yourself in the midst of a season of life that is already so overwhelming is an impossible setup. Again, it's the time in our lives when we need all of that set up for us already, and it's just so not there. So that ends up looking like, that ends up meaning that women start off at a disadvantage when they become mothers. So they start off feeling like they're behind and that they're failing because the supports aren't in place for them to actually feel good. So many of us feel like we're failures as a mother from the very get-go because the support structures are actually failing us.
Do you feel like it's difficult to build a community in the early stages of motherhood too, because you're growing so much? Like, I feel like I tried on a few different hats in a few different communities and circles of people. You know, I didn't really feel like I knew what my convictions were. I got very passionate about, you know, certain social issues that I've since kind of abandoned. Do you feel like that might play a part in it too a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. I think a big part of what's happening postpartum is that there are so many different needs that we have. We have a need to be around other mothers of infants, let's say, so that we can have the empathy of other women in that stage of life. We also have a need as women to have connections with women who are like-minded, who have similar philosophies. But that's a different need than the maternal connection, than having babies, you know, the same age, the same stage in life. We might also have a need for some kind of something that feels really inspiring, like someone else who shares a passion. And then there's just like the basic needs of support in caretaking and childcare so that I can actually take a break? Do we have similar enough parenting philosophies that I can hand you my baby for however long and step away and feel good about it? And so we get really confused right from the beginning, because we go to like a La Leche League meeting or a parenting group of some kind, trying to find connection points. And everybody else is in the same state too. Like, can I trust you? Are you one of my people? How about you? Is there enough here to work with? Are they going to have similar parenting philosophies? Are we going to mesh as women? And it's like so overwhelming. It's almost like trying to add dating into the postpartum period. Is kind of what you're doing. So you're having to also screen people and be like, I don't know. And we're also very sensitive at that point, because hormonally there's a lot going on, and we've never felt so overwhelmed by the needs of another person. So again, like we're so completely disadvantaged, and then trying to have to create connections and create friendships, and then also even just understand what's happening within us. Why am I not enjoying this? Why do I feel like I'm breaking down, all the time? Why does it feel like I'm not bonding with my baby? Or why does it feel like I cannot keep my eyes off my baby to get anything else done? And our experiences of those early months vary so widely. So then we get into, because we live in such a culture of competition as women, we get into the nitpicking of like, well, she's doing it that way, and so clearly we're not.
Right.
Going to be able to connect. And just it's kind of a never ending list of obstacles that we have before us when we become mothers.
Right. I feel like because of that, it's maybe a good exercise, if you can get your head in the game mentally, to begin to become comfortable with discomfort. That, because so often, just in terms of parenting, we're always waiting for the finish line, right? Like, oh, the newborn stage is really, really hard. And then somebody comes in, oh, wait till terrible twos, wait till they start talking, wait till you have a teenager. And it's like, what mentality are we going into with this? Like, is it always going to be terrible, or can we get comfortable with the fact that our relationships with our children are much like anybody else's, and that there's going to be frustration? Like, you're learning how to work with another human, and we can just become comfortable with discomfort a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's kind of essential, because it's another relationship that we're forming, and we have to learn our way through and grow into the capacity to meet this person where they are, learn each other and learn a rhythm. And that's different in every relationship we have in our lives. The other part of it is that we often go into motherhood without a lot of confidence in ourselves, and we aren't taught to trust our instincts. So we put our faith in the quote unquote experts, and then are kind of trained away from trusting ourselves. And so it's hard to know what to listen to. Do I listen to the parenting experts, the sleep experts? Do I listen to what my heart is telling me? And all of these sort of rules around what's the right way. Well, just ask 10 different people. They're going to give you 10 different answers. So
how do we begin to build confidence in mothers?
What I think is essential is that we actually do, even imperfectly, that we figure out how to get a community of support, to find a community of support, and keep at it until we figure out, okay, this feels pretty good. It's going to be imperfect. We're never going to find the perfect anything in life, but to be able to be courageous enough, and also have enough, give ourselves enough permission, because we've got this narrative going that if we need help, we're actually, that good moms don't need help, that you should be able to figure it out on your own and act. What does it mean about you that you can't? And that is just a really toxic way for us to be, it's a toxic narrative. So for us to assume we're going to need help and support of all kinds, and give ourselves plenty of permission to seek that out, realizing it doesn't make us weak, it makes us human. And then find those people that just help you feel like you're at home, because those people then become the people who can reflect your worth back to you, reflect your worthiness back to you, that you can bounce your stories off of and say, this is happening. What do you think about this? In a non-judgmental space. So I think we all have to, I think it's so important that we as mothers learn to be safe people, safe feeling people for other women, so that we really look at, this is another reason self-awareness is so important. Once we've gone through our own healing process and have learned, like, how am I not showing up well? Why am I defensive around this person? Why am I so judgmental around these women? So the more of that self-work we can do, the better equipped we are to be able to walk into a group of people and come with a real open heart and an open mind and make true connections. And then from that place, we become safe feeling people, and we kind of emanate that vibe. And then we sort of draw in and attract other people to be their authentic selves, as opposed to coming in with this air of, I got all my shit together, I got this whole thing figured out, I don't need anybody. I just think that shuts down connection. It keeps it from happening.
I love that. I love that so much, because it really does feel, I feel like I'm too young and underqualified to even be a mother. Like, I feel like I'm just so new to everything still. But I do feel like if we make our focus individually to finding out like what the truest expression of ourselves is, if we make that our job and our priority, I feel like maybe only good can come from that, because we'll really learn who we are. We'll feel like we have our feet on some solid ground, because maybe we can't control anything else outside of us, but at least we can know who we are, what we value, and what's going to make us feel good and supported.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the more we can orient toward that, I think we also then model it for our children. What is it to express yourself authentically in the world? Because it's really the only way to true inner peace and joy, is to be fully yourself in the world. Because when we can be authentic and express the truest parts of ourselves, then we set ourselves up to have true intimacy in relationships.
Mm-hmm.
If we're playing a part or showing up in a certain way because we think that that's what the women around us want to see in order to feel like we'll be accepted, then we're not actually coming from an authentic place, and true intimacy and deep connection aren't possible from that space.
Right. That's so good. So your Instagram is Revolution from Home, right?
Correct.
Okay. And you also have a website?
I do, revolutionfromhome.com.
All right. And you offer coaching?
Yes.
You do so much.
Yes, I do one-on-one coaching. I also have year-long circles, virtual circles for mothers specifically, called Motherworthy. And we have a different theme for every month, with teaching videos and curriculum. And then we meet over Zoom 3 times a month and we check in with each other, get to know each other quite intimately, and then focus our conversation around certain themes. So right now in my groups, we're talking about core gifts and intimacy. We talk about unmet needs and what those look like, and really what we're doing is supporting each other in creating a new narrative for motherhood, and helping each other, reflecting our worth back and forth to each other, and then being kind of a sounding board for each other as we go through life's challenging moments. And it's pretty powerful groups.
That's so good. We have this mentality that relationships born over social media maybe aren't that impactful, or they aren't as impactful as face-to-face relationships. But I feel like what you're doing it kind of throws that out of the water. And I feel like in our time, you almost have to begin to build relationships on a social platform. If you're in the thick of it, if you're alone, maybe that's all you have.
Yeah, that's part of the reason that these groups work so well, is because You can show up in your pajamas. Your life can be happening right behind you in crazy town, and it's okay. Keep yourself on mute and continue on. And the barriers to entry are a lot less than if you had to get yourself dressed, get your kids all ready with all this gear you need, find childcare, go find parking, show up, and then, and that's a lot more time as well. This is the kind of thing where you jump on and off at exactly a certain time. The other thing that I see that really works about these groups, there's many things, but a couple more that I see are that one, it can be when you're really starting to tap into vulnerable self-reflection, it can actually be easier to do that with people who aren't in your local community. And it becomes a really tight-knit group of women, but there's kind of a little bit of like, no, I can tell my full truth to these people, and they're not my neighbors, and they're not, there's not that sort of threat of saying something that someone else in the community might find out about or whatever.
Yeah.
So there's that element. We also do come together at the end of every year and have an in-person retreat. So that becomes a really, really beautiful time of connecting in even deeper. And then usually people sign up for another year. We've got groups going year after year, and the bonds just keep growing. It's pretty great. Do
you have to sign up at a certain time, or is it revolving? Can you just come in?
Yeah, registration opens in September.
Okay. That's really good to know.
In October. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Well, is there anything that you would want to end on? Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
One thing that I do have to offer as kind of a freebie, if you go to my website, I just recently created a product called the Whole Mama Wellness Wheel, and it's a tool that it's a simple tool that helps you to start identify what your needs are and which needs are not being very well met. And I think that from that place, it kind of gives you it's like an initial assessment of where you are in your life, so that if you have really low numbers in certain categories. And I take you through some questions to help you really identify what are the places that if you were to really focus your time and attention on in your life, that would make the biggest difference toward you feeling better, feeling stronger, feeling more empowered. So that's on my website. You can find it on the main page.
That sounds like a really good place for somebody to start. If anybody's listening to this and they're just so beaten down, so worn down, that sounds like at least you can get your foot in the door and start somewhere.
Yeah, I think it's a good starting point. The one thing I'll say is that keep in mind that almost everybody has pretty low numbers in some of the categories, and that's perfectly normal. But not to be discouraged by that just let this be a self inquiry that's really honest. Because from that place, that's when the real growth can happen. We got to get honest with ourselves first.
Okay. So your book is out, or will be when this airs. Where can we get it? Is it going to be in stores? Is it Amazon only?
It's Amazon for now, and it will be available in paperback, Kindle, and Audible. As of this moment, I don't know if the Audible will be available on the 1st. They're a little delayed because of the whole COVID-19 thing.
Right.
But if it's not ready by the 1st, the Audible version will be ready shortly, within another week or two.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I think I just want to thank you again for showing up and doing this interview with me. I'm so excited for your book. Congratulations. I can tell that it was very, very time consuming, and you just poured your heart and soul into it, and it was an absolute pleasure to read.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. All right. I'll talk to you later.
Right. Thanks, Mickey.
Bye-bye.
Bye.